This program tonight we are presenting in conjunction with the Guilford Poets Guild, another celebration of Guilford at its 375th birthday. So please let me introduce of the Guilford Poets Guild, Evelyn Atria.
Oh, welcome. It's so great to see so many of you here to help us celebrate 375 years of verse in Guilford. So for people that usually come to our readings, I just want to tell you at the beginning, we're not going to have an open mic tonight. Usually at our second Thursday readings at the Guilford Green, we start with an open mic and then have a featured poet, but because of our tight program tonight, we're not doing that. And the Guilford Poets Guild is going to be taking a break after tonight so that we can write all summer long, and we will resume our programming in September 11th at the Green Gallery. We will have Kate Russian as our featured poet, and before that we'll have an open mic. We have our schedules for the fall that are turquoise like that at the reception table, so please take a copy and get it into your calendar, and it would be great to see you all. So tonight we'll be exploring poetry in Guilford in the past, in the present, and you know, we may even get a glimpse at the future. So a perfect place to begin tonight is with our young poets, the winners of the Guilford Poets Guild annual poetry contest in the Guilford High School. So I'm going to invite Jane Muir up, and she'll take over this part of the program. Jane has been coordinating this contest for years at the high school, and she'll go from there.
Thank you, Ella. Well, this year we had around 75 submissions for the contest, and the ARC poets read every poem, and then we picked out the ones that got the best scores, and we reread those, and we voted, and this is the way it came out. We do have one special prize that Gordy Whiteman has been giving for the last 3 or 4 years, and it has a $100 cash prize, and it's supposed to be for the best poem about Guilford, but all the poems today were about Guilford. So we had 2 best poems about Guilford. The winner of the Gordy Whiteman Prize is Annie Jonathan. Do you want to come up and read your poems? And she is going to read 2 poems, so hold your applause until after she's finished. Thank you.
Hi. This first poem is the poem I wrote for the Guilford Poetry Contest, and it's sort of written, a lot of us are, well, in my grade, are going off to college, and a lot of kids are saying that they're really happy to, you know, go somewhere that's not Guilford, but I think it goes the other way too. So it's called Where We Come From. He was the kind of boy who made you wonder where he came from. He spent nights racing trains across the town line, spitting watermelon seeds from his window, waited for the summer to end in a place where the beaches were bedecked with only seagulls. He sat in the back of coffee shops and stood in the back of crowds while carousels spun and baseballs flew, as if he knew that this was only temporary. He was the kind of boy who made you think that maybe city life wasn't every life. Maybe a small-town world where the latest film shows are 5 miles over and the latest tragedy draws everyone's tears is a world you want to live in. He threw caps in the air just like the rest of them, and yet he came from more than them. He was the kind of boy who made you wonder where he came from, who made you want to come from there too. Oh. And my second poem, I think a few people have heard before. I wrote it for the Thornton Wilder writing competition, which is a writing competition the Hamden Library holds. It's called To the Wife Waiting at Home for Her Astronaut. There are moments when you think about selling the Toyota that sits in your garage, gathering dust and fueling the musty smell that seeped from the cracked leather as you drove home from the used car lot. Some nights, you back it out onto the driveway, pull up the emergency brake, and take the blanket from his side of the bed, lie on the hood with your head downhill, and wait for a glimmer from the stars to reach out to you. Some nights, you raise a hand and reach back into the sky, and you grope into the dark till the car starts rolling and you have to crawl through the open window to put a stop to it. Your life is a tribute to Elton John, and in the kitchen you hum Rocket Man while the blender runs, loud enough that you can't hear the songs that bring you to tears. A husband in space cannot fill the space next to you in bed, the space that was empty when you woke this morning, and your lips spoke good morning to the sun and good night to the moon, then raced to the nursery to check that the baby had not yet turned blue. It's hard to remember that here in our atmosphere, the oxygen flows freely, and it is only your lungs that seem to be caving in with his absence. The baby has yet to take any small steps, and it is far from leaping. The only skill it has risen to so far is sleeping through the parades of nightly bar-bound, bar-found men, or the cocktail nights of the Nassau wives trying to forget what lonely was. You are the only one with a child, and they raise it like a village of stargazers, rocking the rocking chair until the creaking and squeaking wakes the neighbors. Some nights, sweet Nell with her short-cut hair and a husband who lives in the lab will lead you into the garage and wrap her arms around you, and you let her remind you what it is like to have that space filled by something other than moonbeams. You come away smelling like vanilla perfume and rotting leather, and you bottle feed the baby, though you know it's bad for its teeth. Some nights, you let the car roll just far enough that it scares you. Some nights you hope he'll come home soon, but you're never sure if you'll still be around when he gets here. It's all you can do to look for his eyes in the stars. But some nights you think maybe he doesn't shine as bright anymore. Thank you.
This is your book. This is your check.
Thank you very much.
And you this. And then she's going to take
Am I taking it with you?
I don't know.
Okay. It's okay. No, the camera turned off. Haven't taken the photo yet.
Okay,
Thank you.
And now we're going to give the rest of the prizes like in the same kind of order that Miss America prizes are given. The runners up first. So the first runner up is Josh Stern, and he's a freshman. Okay.
Hi, this is a sonnet I wrote for the contest. It's about Guilford at sunrise. As the slow cyclic sun pulls day from dawn, lime leaves glimmer with a touch of heaven. With crescendo of trills, a wood slow yawn, silk light's golden kiss makes daybreak leaven. The same light strikes down an empty church street, road laced with maple, birch, towering oak, and as snow-white steeple and warm light meet, pale day fills still air, soft dawn is broke. These rays bear too the light tan marsh, barren, a canvas carved by clear saline stream, colonized only by great blue heron. New land is born by golden sunlight's beam. With dreamlike beauty is our hometown scored. By many airs stay in one lives Guilford.
And the next runner-up is a sophomore, and she's going to read one poem, Katie Elman Apsneys.
So this is a poem that I didn't actually write thinking about Guilford necessarily. I was more thinking about like the idea of being somewhere where you can just think and there's not like distractions of lots of things going on. And the image that sort of came to mind when I was writing it was of Jacob's Beach, and it's called Sunset. Cold sand and fading sunshine, the sky purple, darkening, and water, waves, glinting silver and black. The children are leaving, and it's time to return. A little boy with his parents. Tell me, where does the sun go? Out over the water, it's there, sinking, drowning. But then, when does it sleep? The boy is gone, long gone. The beach is empty, and now the sun has lost and the ocean won. Question, when does it sleep? Answer, it doesn't.
And this is your check, it's $25, and then this is your, hang it on the wall. Okay. And now the third place is a freshman who's going to read one poem, Anna Blanchett.
This is a poem I wrote because I was trying to sum up what it was like to grow up in Guilford. And this doesn't really sum up very well what it's like to grow up, but it gets there. The poem is called Sheltered. When I was little, I thought the world began and ended at the Guilford-Madison town line. I would stand on the beach and stare across the water at nothing. Guilford has always been a contrast to other worlds. It has always been a contrast against itself. It is farmland and beach fronts, colonial toil houses and modern luxury mansions. When I was little, it seemed like we traveled across different continents by driving across town. It seemed like we had the whole world contained in neighborhoods. At least that's how it appeared. And besides, my friends were contained in my neighborhood, so what did I care for airplane rides across Europe when I could walk to Emma's house? As we played with our imaginary friends at recess, possibly ghosts of Guilford residents past, we could not fathom the lives of other children like us and other recess yards like ours in this, our same town. We could not see past us in our playground, either through childhood blissful innocence or protective upbringings. As children, we were never expected to think beyond the Guilford-Madison town line.
Okay, this is a book, and this is your check. I think this is $50 for the thing. And that. I like your poem a lot. Now, the second prize was written by a junior, and he's going to have he'll read two poems, and his poem is about the very early days of Guilford. Okay, Pierre.
So I wrote my first poem in the perspective of European settlers coming over to the new land. It was called Guilford Landing. From the small ship come hungry young men, sick of rough sailing, wanting good land. Couldn't believe their eyes, in for a big surprise. Beautiful harbor, beautiful place. Indians want to trade for some space. Gave them all kinds of things from England and France and Spain. They walked on legs all wobbly, these men from off the bouncing sea. They never thought they'd see the day when they would have a place to stay. A beautiful place so close to the sea, with arable land and so many trees. It looked just like the home they left, called it Guilford, Connecticut. And this poem is called The Bear House, and it is in the perspective of a Native American. The bear left here many moons ago, too many hunters on his tail. He followed the paths to the dark woods, lit by the northern stars. And now I sit in his home and shelter from the cold and snow. My fire burns low but warms me as I await the sun. New settlers have come to my land from across the sea. When the sun arrives, I would turn toward my shadow and follow the path of the bear.
I just want to say that the second poem was the one that won the prize, second prize, and that's $75.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Now, the first prize winner is not here. She has an AP test tomorrow, and she's studying. And I think that her poem also goes along with why she's not here. So it's going to be read instead by one of her teachers, John Terenzi. Emma Nanamaker is her name, and she's a senior. So, John.
Yes, I didn't expect this. Actually, I've had Emma in class for since she was a sophomore, and along with AJ this year in AP English, so it's a pleasure. Her poem is called Great Blue Heron. Every so often, I spy a blue heron, dousing her slender beak in the rock-ribbed shores of Lost Lake. She remains frozen in her regal stance. She remains frozen in her regal slant, the faint Long Island breeze, no match for her balance. I wonder if she suspects an intruder on her solitude, slouched on a moss-carpeted boulder. Perhaps she likes the attention. Back when my wings devoured the sky, my dad and I sat on this very rock, dining on knapsack snacks and squinting toward the sunset that engulfs Route 146. Now I hug my arms tight against my chest and brace myself for departure, no longer able to feel satisfied by solitude and the crumble of dirt beneath my soles. My flight is pavement bound. Thank you.
Are we going to give him it? Yeah, you will give it to her. Okay.
I told Emma that I would forge your name.
Okay, here we go.
No, I did. Thank you. Oh, look. Thank you.
I just want to say that when we picked Emma's poem, it was unanimous. I think that was the only poem in the whole group that we were all unanimous that it was a number 3. So that concludes the readings from the student poets.
Well, as you can see, the arts are alive and well in Guilford. And if you look around the room, this is all work by students in Guilford High School. So it's a really tremendous, colorful backdrop that we have here tonight. So throughout history, the human spirit has always been seeking creative expression in the arts. And so now we're going to look back at the poetry written in the early days of Guilford. So I want to thank Patty Baldwin, I'm not sure if she's still here, for assisting us in finding material in the library's historic room. She was really very helpful. So what I'm going to do now is call Gwen Gunn up, and she's going to share some early poems with you. And then following her will be Julie Harris, who will tell us about Guilford's poet who reached high acclaim during his lifetime. So we'll do that part of the program now.
So I'm going to give a brief history of the poetry in Guilford. And I decided to move backwards in time because we end up with Fitzgreen Halleck, who was our most famous poet. But at present, the most famous poet I know of in this town is Susan Howe, who actually was one of the people who started a movement called the Language Poets. But there are many other local poets whose work and bios can be found in the 10th Anniversary Poets Guild Anthology. And if you don't have it, I believe there's still a few available at Breakwater Books. So I hope you can get that and see how much talent there is in town. There are no doubt many other poets who are sharing their work with others or hiding their poems away in a drawer like Emily Dickinson, but we don't know about all of them. But I know there's a group of writers at the Women and Family Life Center in Guilford that's facilitated by the poet and artist Charlotte Smith. And also John Terenzi, who just read Emma's poem, is a published poet. The Guilford Poets Guild is a group of about 12 poets who sponsor the second Thursday poet series that Evelyn was telling you about. And they meet on their own now, but in the past, Charlotte Currier, a poet and respected Wesleyan writing professor, was their leader. And then the late Guilford poet Katrina Van Tassel, who for nearly 20 years edited and published a magazine called Embers, became a facilitator of the Guilford poets. She, along with Maureen Corcoran, our local bookstore owner, was active in creating the first anthology of Guilford poets in 1999. Katrina encouraged performance in the schools with her pickle players, and along with Connie Merman, a past Guilford High School librarian, organized the yearly poetry contest in the high school and our poetry reading there. And you've just seen the results of that. So it's lasted almost 30 years. Before that, the group was led for a few years by Rebecca Newth Harrison, whose books of poetry, Zeem and A Journey Whose Bones Are Mine, were published in the 1970s. She moved to Arkansas in 1983 and has written 4 more books of poetry plus children's literature and is active in promoting the arts in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So it's our loss that she moved. In the 1970s, until his death around 1980, the Guilford poets met under the direction of Richard Raymond. And during that time, he published 3 books of poetry: A Moment of Bells, Report to a Name on a Stone, and Night Letter. Of his first, Stanley Kunitz, who was twice Poet Laureate of the United States, wrote, "I have known Richard Raymond's poems for several years and am glad to see them gathered in this mature and solid collection. He is a direct, gentle, and honest poet." The Nobel Prize-winning poet Derek Walcott also respected Richard's work and was pleased to be introduced to him. Richard Raymond continued critiquing our poetry until his death in the early 80s. Mary Bishop Bullard published Restless Rivers in 1954. How's that for a Guilford name? Bishop Bullard. Her poetry was both serious and humorous, and I particularly liked one called At the Railroad Station. So I love all the sounds in it. At the railroad station. Redcaps hustling, travelers bustling, trainmen calling, or are they bawling? Baggage banging, train bells clanging, babies crying, terribly trying. Footsteps scurrying, late ones hurrying, some folk lunching, some just munching. Everyone talking, taxis squawking, ticket sellers punching, sandy souls crunching. Telegraph ticking, impatient folk kicking, leave takers kissing, no such chance missing. Lovers embracing, separation facing, other lovers meeting, oh, what a greeting. From more, I'm refraining, 'cause here comes my train Oh, another sort of humorous writer was Harry Durant, who published Doggerel Days in 1939. As you can see, he liked wordplay. At that time, he was living in the Lyman Beecher house in Guilford. But as he himself said, he was not likely to replace Shelley or Keats, or even James Whitcomb Riley. One poem is entitled High School Love. Molly, be my sweetheart when spring comes o'er the lea, and give the earth new life, so give new life to me. Molly, be my sweetheart when fields with golden sheer lie 'neath the harvest moon, then be my sweetheart dear. Molly, be my sweetheart when winter days come cold and white, when youth is spent, still be my sweetheart old. Molly, be my sweetheart wherever I may be, although the whole wide world may come between you and me. Harry Durant may not have been the greatest poet, but he did have an amazing life. He was a silent movie mogul in Hollywood, a Broadway playwright, a published novelist, a member of the Connecticut Senate, and even attained a judgeship. In Guilford, he was now producing plays at the Chapel Playhouse, which I believe is right over there, was right over there. And it was New England's most successful summer theater. Another poet was S. Ward Loper, who published Echoes from the Home of Halleck in 1904. And this is a lovely book, which you may want to look at afterwards. It has pictures of Fitzgreen Halleck, as well as the Guilford Green, which absolutely looks like a forest. It's so full of trees, and the old stone house and Lake Quannapaug, which is spelled Quonepaug for some reason back then. And he wrote of people and places in Guilford. I think of him as the Gordy Whiteman of his day. I don't know if you know Gordy's books, but he writes a lot about Guilford and Guilford in the past. He also, this man also wrote of Guilford's history and people and places in Guilford. One of his historical poems is called Lafayette on Guilford Green. It was a grand occasion when Lafayette was seen reviewing veteran soldiers upon the Guilford Green. It was in 1824 when last he came to see the well-beloved people he bravely helped to free. From New Haven to New London, he then was on his way and stopped a while in Guilford on this historic day. And the old militia turned out and gave him honor due. And on the Guilford Green, he held a brief review. Kind words he gave and praised those patriots tried and true, whose noble worth and valor through all the past he knew. And when the artillery swept past in rapid runs and trained close to the ground the muzzles of their guns, those huge old cannon gave forth a mighty roar, which made the hills to echo and rattled every door. And Lafayette cried, "Bravo!" and said it was all fine, when all the troops saluted and cheers went down the line. And for all who gathered there, it was a grand display, when thus they gladly welcomed the hero of the day. A day to be remembered when Lafayette was seen reviewing veteran soldiers on the Guilford Green. Another local poet was M.C. Beattie, who in 1895 dedicated a book called simply Poems to W.R.C. Parmalee of Guilford, another famous old name. Mr. Andrew Benton gave a reading of his poetry at the Music Hall in Guilford. He must have been very popular because, according to a review in the Shoreline Sentinel in 1877, quote, "He was unable to speak at first because of the thunder of applause which greeted him," unquote. Then he began. "I came not here, my friends, to boast that I am the Guilford poet. I count it bliss to make a verse, but not such bliss to show it." His poems were often interrupted by laughter, and they particularly liked this one. "When Lucy was but very young, she thought she was a belle. She used so much perfume, some might know her by her smell." Lucy was probably someone they knew. In Mary H. Griswold's scrapbook, there was a poem written around the middle of the 19th century by Carrie Chatfield called The Old Stone House. It began, "Twice has a century touched thee with its glory, gray watcher by the sea. Did they who built thee dream of the story that in those years should be?" And it ends, "Crowned with thy ivy's ever radiant glory, still watch the centuries long." And it has continued to watch. I want to thank Patty Baldwin for helping us find all these poets in our history. Fitzgreen Halleck was back living in Guilford when that last poem was written, and was no doubt an inspiration to the local poets. But Juliana Harris will tell you of his illustrious life.
Thank you, Gwen. One of the things that the Poets Guild looks forward to the most is going to the high school every year and having a chance to read to the students. And this year, I said to the students, "Today I'm going to talk to you about Fitzgreen Halleck." Totally blank faces. Fortunately, I didn't talk to them about Fitzgreen Halleck that day, but I told them that tonight I would. Fitzgreen Halleck is a classic example of the fleeting of fame. Fitzgreen Halleck was born at the corner of Whitfield and Water Street in 1790. He was the son of a tailor and a schoolmistress, but he didn't hang around Guilford very long. When he was 20 years old, he headed for the big city. And when he was in New York, he started writing satires of New York society, which made him very popular and earned him a place in the Knickerbocker Society. Fitzgreen Halleck was big. He was called America's Byron. He was read by Abraham Lincoln in the White House. He met all the leading literary lights of his day, including Charles Dickens, and traveled abroad. But as time went by, he fell out of favor. And he returned to his hometown in 1849, where he lived with his sister Marie, and where he died in 1867. 10 years later, for reasons that no one seems to know why, a statue of Fitz Green Halleck was erected on the Literary Walk in Central Park in New York and dedicated by President Rutherford B. Hayes. Love that name. They don't name presidents like that anymore. So that was the end of Fitz Green Halleck, who now stands or sits in a statue in Central Park, along with some other guys like Bill Shakespeare and Robbie Burns. Yeah. And he is the least known of all the literary statues. He is buried right here in Guilford in Alderbrook Cemetery. You can go visit him anytime you would like. And now I would like to share with you a tribute to Fitz Green Halleck that appeared in a magazine in Connecticut a few years back. On seeing Guilford, I believe no one would express surprise to learn that here a famous poet lived. The very air is redolent with romantic reverie. The old stone houses with their glimmering panes sleep in beds of flowers on verdant, downy swards. In such a gentle place was born Fitz Green Halleck, a name of note, one of America's greatest men of letters. In 1847, he strolled these peaceful lanes of this old shore, meditating, planning to give beauty to the world. This quiet, gentle man loved his state and wrote of Connecticut in his greatest work. And now the words of Fitz Green Halleck. And still her gray rocks tower above the sea that crouches at their feet, a conquered wave. 'Tis a rough land of earth and stone and free, where breathes no castled lord or cabined slave, where thought and tongues and hands are bold and free, and friends will find a welcome, foes a grave, and where kneel, save when to heaven they pray, nor even then, unless in their own way. Green is the turf above Halleck, who is interred in Alderbrook Cemetery on Boston Street in Guilford. He waits quietly to be rediscovered by a new generation of poetry fans who may help him rise once again in the world of letters.
So in 1877, in a Guilford paper, there was an article, and this was at the time of the unveiling of the statue in Central Park. And I'd just like to quote the last line of the article. It said, "Guilford people cannot help but feel a sense of pride that Guilford produced one of the first poets of the time." So here we are, 2014, and we're still producing fine poets. So I would like to introduce a poet that was born here, who has lived here his whole life and has been writing poetry his whole life. Well, maybe it started at 5, I don't know, most of his life. Gordy Whiteman, and he has written 2 volumes of poetry on Guilford, Whitfield Crossing, and the hometown Guilford. So will you come up and share a few poems with us?
when you go into Alderbrook Cemetery and you drive into the first driveway in to the cemetery, straight ahead you'll see a huge obelisk, and that is Fitzgreen Halleck's marker. So you won't have any trouble searching for it if you do happen to go out there. When he came back to Guilford, he bought a house on Water Street. And that house, as you drive down Water from Whitfield, and you pass the town parking lot, it's the second building on the right-hand side. And I see Bob Linsky is here. Bob's family used to own that house. And that was the house that Fitzgreen Halleck lived in his later years when he came back. I lived there for 1 year when I was a teenager. And I might have lived in his bedroom upstairs, I'm not sure. But I got up the next morning, I said, I feel like writing a poem. So, it's been a long day, and I'm just going to read 2 or 3 poems. And sometimes when it's evening and we're tired and we want to forget our cares, a lot of people meditate. And in meditation, they say a mantra. Usually, if you're a Buddhist, you would say Om. I'm suggesting you might try apple. Consider apple. Make it your own, red or green or the deep maroon of a New York Rome or a Fiji, savored for its snappy resistance to your teeth's eager insistence for apple. If your appetite leans toward delicious, if your dish is Macintosh, Cortland, Winesap, Granny Smith, whatever you wish, make it your own. Apple. Meditate on cider, fresh or hard, made from windfalls strewn on the yard, around and under the tree. Use the excess for strudel, butter, sauce, a sugar-free pie of apple. Think of the curved, uneven shape, the stem, the eye of your apple where a blossom has been. Imagine a peeler in your one hand, an apple in your other. Let the peel dangle down, a red, green, dappled, unchained bauble, as the peeler exposes the snow-white apple. Consider its story, starting with Eve's apple and Adam's apple, to Newton, to Tell, and a homework reprieve stemming from the bribe of a shining apple. From the ear of your mind, receive the sound of the bell as the children bound from the school into the autumn of pumpkin, maple, apple. Picture the apples on bishops' trees, with look, ma, no hands and your eyes closed. Run through the seasons, trees in snow, branches in blossom, summer growth, pick your own. Touch the gnarl and the bark. Repeat this oath in the ephemeral dark. Apple, apple, apple. Are you asleep? Lately, we've been having some horrific, tremendous rainstorms, flooding streets, and I just want to let you know this isn't the first time that this has happened in Guilford. I lived on Seaside from age 10 to age 17, Seaside Avenue, and back in those days, Seaside Avenue flooded with a good deal of regularity. Half a dozen times a year, all the houses were surrounded by water. If you were the grocery shopper in the family, you had to kind of keep a weather eye on the tides. because you might buy your groceries, come home with ice cream, and find you couldn't get to your house. So this is called Springtide 1940. Curious, the tide rises to the high water mark and decides that today it must go farther. Calmly it fills the marsh between Jacob's Beach and the road. Reaching a low spot, it expands to the other side and meanders up the street, crossing lawns, trespassing into cellars. Landscape becomes seascape. Houses take on the persona of houseboats. Laundry flutters on an ocean-going line. A submerged lawnmower sits helpless as seaweed floats by. A cat, marooned atop a birdhouse, crouches while anxious sea sparrows swoop around it. New renters in Ella Needham's cottage discover why old-timers held off planting gardens. Blind Jenny opens her door, puts her nose to the wind, and makes note once more that this highest of tides will ebb to seek new ground elsewhere. When I was age 5 to age 10, I lived on North Fair Street, 154 North Fair Street. And this was during the height of the Great Depression. And a lot of people were on hard times back then. The house that I lived in had no inside toilets. We had an outhouse on the side yard. We had one cold water spigot in the kitchen. That was the only water that came into the house. In the wintertime, Mom drew the laundry tub full of water, and one by one we went into the kitchen and she closed the door and we took our baths in the kitchen, which was not always easy because there was always somebody jiggling the knob saying, "I'm coming in, I'm coming in." So, but this one talks about summer, and this is getting clean. In the poem, I mention a swimming spot. It was called the Grove. Today, if you go up Church Street and get on to I-95 as if you're going into New Haven, just as you leave the entrance and start onto the highway, that's where the Grove was. And just to the south of that was a big farm, dairy farm. There were dairy farms all over Guilford at that time, called Pitkin's Dairy Farm. So that gives you a little bit of a setting. Getting clean. Summers, after supper, we swam naked at the Grove, which is now and forever buried under Interstate 95. But then in the 1930s, we, the men in the family, Dad, Tom, Gib, and me, ages 30, 9, 5, and 7, we would walk up North Street with towels over our shoulders, cross Pitkin's cow pasture, pass through a gate at the far end of the field, and into a scene right out of a Gainsborough. Huge elms leaning over the West River, sprinkling shade on the meandering current, cattails and reeds on the far bank. The water as high as a young boy's chest. We took turns with the ivory soap, which floated on the river's surface. Then, while it was still light, we dove for stones in the clean, clear water. I can remember almost every step of the walk back home in the gathering darkness, past old deaf Mike Sullivan with his radio blaring, Dad kidding us about washing off a pound of dirt, fragrances of cow barn, mowed lawns, honeysuckle and roses, getting to our front yard and hearing the clatter of dishes being washed, Mom and our sisters waiting for us. I want to read one poem which I had not planned to read, and I'm going to end with this. Thank you. I'm going to end with this poem. I hadn't planned on reading it, but then I saw several selectmen in the audience, Joe and Veronica Wallace and Carl. So this poem is called Town Government, and I know Joe has read this because he sent me a very nice letter afterwards talking about the poem. And this is remembering Les Dudley. Les Dudley was a first selectman in the 1930s and 40s. So it's a little look back as to how Guilford was back in that time. Town government, remembering Les Dudley. Back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, Les Dudley was Guilford's first selectman. During the Great Depression, if you were down on your luck and you went into his office, he would sign his initials to your grocery list, signifying to the grocer that the town would pick up the bill. If you were the man in the family and Les thought you were able, he might suggest you could work at $7 a week for the WPA, which in Guilford he directed. On many summer days, you would see Les out with the road crew, filling in potholes or performing other road maintenance. You might say the boss was on the job to ensure there wasn't too much lollygagging. You know, one man working while three others leaned on their shovels. The town paid him separately for his road work because, more often than not, Les used his own men and equipment. Of course, he was involved with the budgeting, the payroll, the day-to-day paperwork that had the town running smoothly. For these efforts, Les was given a salary of about $600 a year. You could count the town hall employees on the fingers of your two hands. The police department had 2 or 3 full-time cops and a part-timer in the evenings who used his own car. The fire department was all volunteer. The ambulance driver was a policeman. When I came down with polio in 1944, 2 town policemen, Nelson Leslie and Pat Casale, put me on a stretcher and drove me to Grace New Haven Hospital. That task probably left the policing of the whole town to the chief until they returned. Around the late 1950s, Guilford was growing. The first selectman's job was growing too. The town fathers decided that after the next election, the salary for that position would be raised to around $6,000 a year. A whopping 10% or 10 times increase over the present remuneration. When election day arrived, Les was voted out of office. The majority's view was that if Les had been doing the job for $600, there was no way they were going to pay him 10 times that amount. So after decades of faithful service as first selectman, Les lost his job. The new first selectman lasted 1 2-year term. He was kind of vociferous, I thought. Maybe that's too strong. Maybe he should have gotten out and done some road work, like folks were used to seeing Les do. Most old-timers have forgotten his name. They still remember Les Dudley. And that's it. I just want to say, Joe, keep up your good work, and I hope all of your potholes are little ones.
So now we've reached the moment, the special moment in the celebration of Guilford's 3 375th celebration of poetry when the first poet laureate of Guilford will be announced. So I'm going to invite First Selectman Mazza up to do that, to bestow the honor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Gordy, thanks for that advice. I will not take a 10 times increase in salary. You can be sure of that. I want to welcome everybody to the library, and it's my honor to announce the first Guilford Poet Laureate. And I'm going to read a proclamation that was adopted by the Board of Selectmen, and it reads as follows. Whereas the Board of Selectmen of the town of Guilford would like to formally recognize Gordy Whiteman as Guilford's Poet Laureate. And after that advice, you have my vote again on it. It is only fitting that during the town's 375th anniversary celebration of poetry, we acknowledge Gordy's many accomplishments and contribution to the town through his poetic work. And now, therefore, we, the Board of Selectmen of the town of Guilford, wish to extend our sincere appreciation for all his contributions he has made to the town through poetry, and we officially declare you as Guilford's Poet Laureate. It is witness whereof we hereto set our hand and cause the seal of the town of Guilford to be affixed this 8th day of May 2014 with our thanks and appreciation, and it's signed by all 5 selectmen.
Just have to say, I must say a few words. My mind is racing like crazy right now. By the way, I see it's signed by Democrats and Republicans, so this is serious.
We do agree on something.
It's wonderful. It's one of the things I love about Guilford. Quite often, when a selectman is in town, you don't know if that person's Democrat or Republican. They always seem to just be working so well together. But wondering what to say, my mind goes back 600 or 400 years, believe it or not, and goes over to England, where John Donne said, "No man is an island." And I certainly have never been a man alone in my efforts to write a good poem. And I must recognize, first of all, my real true love, my wife Andrea. She is the first one who sees every poem that I write. I bring the finished product to her, and sometimes realize after she reads it and talks that it isn't finished. And I take it back to my den and try again. I definitely want to thank my sister Betty. Betty published poetry before I did, and she encouraged me to write, and she's always been an inspiration to me in so many things. So I want to acknowledge Betty as the first poet. Actually, Mom was the first poet in the family, but you were the second. And the Guilford Poets Guild, it's been wonderful. I've been in the Guild almost 30 years. I've been reading at the high school for about 26 or 27 years. And it's been just a wonderful thing to be able to do this. This is such a wonderful town, and I'm just so happy to be living here. And I've got a few more years than most of you, although not all. I see a few that might be just a few years older than me. But to live here since the 1920s up till now has just been wonderful. I appreciate it. Joe, thank you, and would you thank the other members of the board too? This is just a wonderful gift for me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.